Yeah, so Balaji's been sharing a lot of data about India on Twitter, and there's some very interesting maps that he has put forward, um, which, and one of them just showed the distribution of the population of India and how it's all basically in that Himalayan steppe northern valley that basically runs from the west down to the east towards Sri Lanka. Um,
Oh, the
where
Northern Belt.
Yeah, that northern belt.
Yeah.
I might be getting my geography wrong because I'm not that familiar, but it's fascinating because it's like 65, 70%, 75% of the population is like packed into probably um, maybe 15% of the landmass
That kind of makes
of
sense.
of the entire area, and that area of India is like smaller than the Amazon rainforest, the entire
Yeah.
subcontinent.
Well, it's so interesting because I read this book by this ex Procter and Gamble CEO of India. It was called, his name was Gujran Das, and his book was called India Unbound. And I read it like 20 years ago. And he was talking about how at that time, that whole like Indian IT revolution, it was mostly centered around the South, which had
Hmm.
like Bangalore and Hyderabad and all these other southern tech hubs. But he was saying how the demographic profile of the country at the time was like those cities that got rich and urbanized and had all these tech companies were actually demographically flattening out, and all the like high birth rates was in the north,
Yeah.
and that the north is way poorer and way more like doesn't have as much of a history of commerce like the southern cities and
Oh,
stuff. So
really? That's interesting.
I guess that's playing out now.
That area must be like that area must be the fertile like belt of the country because it's basically like a collection of four or five major rivers that run off the off the Himalayan mountains into this massive valley. Um, so yeah, I guess that area probably traditionally is just a super agrarian area, kind of like you were implying.
What's
that the
interesting to me
that the
is
mountain
like,
people came and conquers.
yeah, the north, especially when you get to the like the northern part. What's interesting to me is like I'm kind of shocked. I guess I need to revisit India. Last time I was there was the only time I was there was in 2013, almost 10 years ago.
Hmm.
And I've been to Pakistan since then. And from what I gather, the gap has been like, it was always a size gap. So like if one country is like 10 times bigger, or let's say 8 7 8 times bigger, you would assume that okay, that the geniuses, the one in a million geniuses would be 7 or 8 times larger. So on the fringes of like achievement, you would have a lot more of these geniuses being coming out of India than Pakistan, just based on like bell curves. But the I'm just shocked at like how big the gap has grown, in my opinion, from my observation, like visiting Pakistan since I was a kid, between India and Pakistan. Because what I see on the internet, especially with Web3, is like there's nothing going on in Pakistan in terms of Web3, and everything is like half of Web3 seems to be being pushed forward by Indians from India.
Yeah, it does. The last 6 months, I mean, I'm not someone who observes it that closely, but the last 6 months, it seems like there's a huge amount of just activity and innovation that's happening out of that space. Um, it's crazy. It's definitely a place that I want to travel to. I think I've never been to that part of the world. Um, but it's interesting because it's the same observation. It seems like the same observation you had about Jakarta in Indonesia, what almost, well, I guess 4 years ago now in 2018, which was like um, the society is basically with the mobile phone just kind of leapfrogging from like coming into the modern age is just utilizing the phone to kind of leapfrog um, some of the like industry and infrastructure that built up America over the last 50 years to like now come online on the mobile device.
Yeah,
It
it's
just,
crazy.
yeah, just observing from afar, it seems that way.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I there's so many like little things that I noticed that one of the big differences is why was during the I used to give this lecture when I was trying to recruit people for an old company in Pakistan. Um, I used to give this lecture explaining how like one of the reasons why Americans, which were like mostly agrarian farmers in the 19th and 20th century, and there was obviously a transition to industrialization and now deindustrialization. But one of the reasons why a farmer in Iowa was 10 times or 20 times or even 50 times richer on a per capita basis than a farmer in like agrarian India or in these Indus Valley places, it wasn't because the land wasn't fertile and they weren't getting rainfall. It was because like a big factor was when they would grow something, they could take that potato or the wheat and get it to market and get international market prices because they could put it, the infrastructure was there to put that product on a ship in the Mississippi and get it to world markets. And they would get world market prices. Whereas
Yeah,
like, and that was the
which
biggest
would
thing that I, go ahead.
no, I which I would, I mean, at the time would basically be Europe, but
Yeah,
well, I guess
Europe and
probably the European colonies, the network of colonies, and the Commonwealths as well. But yeah,
and it still like still makes a big difference like having deep water ports and physical infrastructure and all that. And that's kind of a big thing in the last like 18 months or whatever with the supply chain stuff. But if you look at like how to get product to market today, all you
yeah,
need is a 4G connection. Like I'm sitting
yeah. At least in
in
knowledge economy, yeah,
yeah, like I'm sitting in the in a volcanic island between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and there's people, they have iPhones, they have the same laptops, they don't even pay that much more, like in terms of prices is relatively the same. And you couple their smart people in Indonesia, as long as they can speak English, you couple them, like if they want to make a program and take it to market, dude, I didn't even realize that the the final piece, like why wasn't the internet having this explosion of like developing world businesses? It was because of the financial systems, because nobody could get paid in by PayPal and all this stuff. Dude, crypto has blown it up. That's what I'm
yeah,
noticing.
yeah. It's interesting because I definitely am. Like I was trying to explain this to a friend the other night, and I think there's still a strong bias among the average American that is a U.S. centric bias that doesn't understand how powerful crypto is as a international transfer mechanism, because it's really the two things together that matter. You have the coming online of the global population that can now participate in a global marketplace, and the ability to make currency transfer or value transfer instantaneously from me to you anywhere on the planet, and all you need is a phone or a laptop depending on the wallet that you're using
Do you remember?
to do it.
Do you remember when I was? I think you and I had started already when I was showing how fintech had blown up like overnight in China,
Yeah.
and how
Mhm.
we pay and Alipay, the QR code based payments had just
Yeah.
gone from like nothing to half of all payments to all payments within like I don't know seven
It's
eight
like
hundred
18 to 20,
days.
I think it was that,
Like
yeah, 18 to 24 months or something.
yeah, it was like overnight, and then it was just because everybody already been using smartphones for like 10 years, and then QR code payment, and then like the market just consolidated on this duopoly, right?
Yeah.
Very similar to how over whatever 20-30 years Visa MasterCard just consolidated into like there's two, and then there's like also rans like Amex and Discover or whatever, right?
Yeah. Or
And then
maybe boutique is the right way to describe it rather than also rans.
or whatever,
I mean,
right? They're
because
like
yeah, there's the
they're
primary
not
global players, and then there's the
so
secondary brands.
yeah, and so I would call that a duopoly for a maybe
Hmm.
a slight oligopoly, but generally a duopoly. And then, okay, fine, whatever. That was using old technology where like people are like doing this like imprint on 3 sheets of paper, and then they'll like, you know how like there's, you know what T
Get the
plus
pink
two
slip or
is?
what?
Yeah, you know what T
Yeah.
plus two is in stock market and all that. Like the whole thing about the Robinhood was like people were doing these like high speed trades, and the UI of Robinhood would make it appear that it was real. but actually they were going backwards, and like it'll take 2 days to actually settle. Okay, that's just a phone version of the Visa, MasterCard, and that like pink slip thing is still taking. It's just like T
Yeah,
plus
you have like a clear. You
14.
basically have a clearing time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so then the risk is on the credit card issuer to make, for fraud and all that. Dude, with Soul Pay that we saw like 2 days ago, someone jacked a Square card. You literally whip it out, it auto scans, and then it pops up. Do you want to pay with Soul Pay? And then USDC price comes out, and then you just pay it, and it's instant, like fractions of a second. That's just like WeChat Pay, Alipay, but on a decentralized global settlement layer that nobody controls.
Yeah.
And so if I saw this kind of behavior in China and saw how fast the adoption rate was a couple of years ago, that's why I'm like, holy shit, it's moving way faster than people think. The apps, dude, Phantom app just came out, whatever, a week ago on the App Store.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So that means I don't know how that I would have a death count on companies like Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, even Square, man. Square, I think was
you're forgetting about the lurking giant in the room that keeps zombie companies alive, which is
the federal government.
Yeah, the U.S. federal government that's gonna blow bazillions of dollars into these bank accounts to just keep them going and churning.
Well, what happens is like all that Fed printing, in my mind, it strikes me as the analogy of amphetamines. Like you can get superhuman behavior out of a regular, let's say a fat body, like just some fat dude do you ever see like what is it, Chris Farley, when he's like dancing around like a bear with his 300-pound body? Yeah, he's like dancing around like stuff. Yeah, like he's in the fucking Olympics, and of course he has a heart attack at 40 and dies, right? Like our eyes, that's why it was so interesting. So like the dollar, there are limits to how much the like foreign populations will accept fucking fake. Right now, even with as much Fed printing as they've been doing, USDC seems to be like the go-to stable coin.
Is that what's happening outside the States? It's hard to tell sometimes inside the States because the behavior, it's still fringe behavior, but the impression that I get is that at least in East Africa and Southeast Asia, it's not fringe behavior at all anymore.
I would even I might even change our mental model to say what's happening outside, like rather than like geographically, think about, maybe we should start to think about it in terms of, is that what's happening in crypto? Because in my mind, it is what's happening in crypto. Because do you remember that thing that Balaji said in one of his podcasts where he was saying, did he use the word geodesic distance, or like the social graph distance between people rather than the physical distance between people?
I don't remember exactly, but I think this might have been one of the Tim Ferriss podcasts that he did.
Like your physical proximity to the guy in your condo building is whatever, like 20 meters or 50 meters, but your social proximity to me and our like mental connection that we're communicating through bits and bytes is way tighter based on the volume of our texts, right? And our mind share. So like that is kind of why I think the analogy of crypto rather than the analogy of East Africa, like, so I mean, there's I think at least two lenses we should put on it. Like in addition to the physical lens of like how are East Africans trading, how are crypto people trading?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, I think, because you are getting a bifurcation in how commerce is happening, right? You have like more traditional marketplaces, especially where physical goods and physical labor is traded. And then you have like knowledge economy, which a huge portion of knowledge economy is still happening on the institutional and enterprise level. But then you have like this kind of crypto knowledge economy that's happening on more of an individual freelance level. And that seems to be one of the primary bifurcations in marketplaces right now, is you have this individual freelance economy that is going to be extremely or likely, I should say, to be extremely crypto savvy. And then you have more of the enterprise scale, which will probably get there in the end, but will be much slower in the process of getting there.
Yeah, it's that is the thing. And you know, like in Africa, they've already been pioneers in M-Pesa. Remember that? Do you remember that? Yeah, so like
Yeah.
they were, what's so funny to me, what I've observed is, do you know this concept of like the Washington consensus? Do you remember what that was?
Like with the Washington blob kind of forms an idea
Yeah,
and like
but
pushes it forward.
yeah, it was exactly that, except in the blob is for like international, like foreign policy, international relations, like what should we do with our military. But the Washington consensus is like that blob concept, except for what should we do with our economic foreign policy, and how should we architect the world's economy through organizations like the IMF and the World Bank and WTO and stuff. And so their idea was, I used to, you know, in my academic work and when I was in DC and stuff, and I would follow and read all the stuff that they would put out. And the consensus was, yeah, it was mostly formed around like post Soviet and communist countries adopting the free markets, and then free governance, like democracy and free markets. But what happened was they would publish, they would get so excited, and they gave the Nobel Prize to this guy who created Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. And he created microloans. And what he would do is he would create these like, it was like a nonprofit thing. And what they would do is they would buy a cow for like a lady, and then they would she would take a loan against the cow, and then through milking and then distributing the milk, she'd get revenue and then pay back the loans. And then they created these microloans. Long story short, they gave this guy the Nobel Prize, and then eventually the Bangladesh government took over the thing. And I think they put the guy in jail or like for talking shit. And so that's long story short, like the developing world still has issues when it comes to, I'm not like shitting on Bangladesh because they've done a remarkable job economically over the last decade, but you know, they're still not like US levels of free speech, right? But and obviously they still deal with like you know, if you tall poppies get chopped, you know that expression, like he got too big for his britches and the government just like shut him down. But all these DC, Washington people get super psyched about like nonprofit microloans and all that. So he created that. Then they got super psyched about M-Pesa, which was like this, basically like it's like PayPal but like run by phone companies, and it was a way for like, you know, Tanzania and Kenya to tax their population, and people could make payments and all that stuff. But as soon as crypto is like, hey, that's great, we'll just do that, but like now governments don't control it and the free market will figure out. DC, Brussels, Beijing, everybody and their mothers in the governments around the world are freaking the F out, because they're like, wait. We like these concepts, the whole like left wing of the world, the left, the like center left, the Democrats and all these people were like, no, we want development at the poor level, but we want to be the ones who assign the rules, and we want to be directing that shit. You can't get rich on your own. You guys just creating software that allows you to trade with each other outside of our control, that's not allowed. Because like crypto is that shit times a million actually working at a global scale. And they gave this guy the Nobel Prize 10 years ago, and today the fucking governments around the world are losing their fucking shit because they're like, DeFi shouldn't be allowed to happen. So your uncle Bernie Sanders over there, he's losing his shit, right? And his political wife, Warren, what's her name? Pocahontas. What's her real name? Yeah, Elizabeth Warren, right? So she's all about like cancel student loans and like let's make the world financially better for like regular people. But as soon as like regular people are like making money out of
it's basically once it's in their own hands, you know.
Oh no, we can't be having the internet make people rich if we're not the ones directing it. It's like, okay.
I mean, to play devil's advocate, there is I think there is an argument to be made that like I mean, I don't know how fully formed my thinking is on this, but you do have like all these unintended or collateral consequences of like unleashing this type of technology on a global scale, because it radically destabilizes institutional power and state capacity, not necessarily state capacity in the short term, but state power in the short term, because you no longer have a government or a banking system ostensibly controlled by the government as an intermediary in financial transactions, which, from the state's perspective, I can see why you would want to like kind of go after that, because you need to have, I mean, there is an impulse to have control over transactions and monetary policy as a way to like enforce tax policy. But I don't think, like, honestly, my thinking on this isn't very clear, and it doesn't seem to me that
Well,
like anyone in government's thinking is very clear about this either.
your initial impulse is kind of right, and it's that first pass thinking on the subject. But let me counter that with this, and I think your thinking is correct in the initial on the surface, which is uh money as a paper construct, and the way like the history of monies is, and there's like a ton of readings and writings about that. It's always been like governments never really had much control over it anyways. And
Hmm.
what you said actually implicitly in your retort was correct, which is governments use inflationary policies as a way to tax the population without actually
Hmm.
having to nominally raise their taxes. So they're getting taxed like crazy, at an extra 20% tax if there's a 20% inflation. But first of all, rich people don't pay that, and second of all, the poor
Yeah,
people
it's
don't
not levied
understand it.
equally. Yeah, it's
Yeah, and
not levied equally.
that's the whole point of like why unions were so useful for like regular people, is because they're like they had a couple of like high IQ people at the end who like communist economists, whoever they were, and then or just like and they were like, we will negotiate pay raises to beat inflation and all that stuff that the regular, because for whatever reason every generation keeps forgetting the fact that inflation is a thing. And so like 30 years down the line, everybody's like, oh, I'm rich, and you're like, you're not rich. Like
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting. I do want to kind of circle back to something that I find to be is going to end up probably being a footnote of history, and it's going to be a footnote of history probably for all the wrong reasons. And back, or I shouldn't say for all the wrong reasons, but people are going to kind of miss the point, I think, of this. You and I actually discussed this 4 or 5 years ago when Trump first assumed office. But it was very interesting that one of the first things he did was in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was like a big campaign thing for Bernie Sanders. But of all the things that have kind of actually, I don't know if this arguably has helped crypto kind of explode into the Southeast Asian market or not, but it's definitely not having TPP in that area kind of reduces the American government's capacity to regulate commerce in that space, and then probably I would suspect, as kind of a side note, um, have less influence on crypto regulations in that space. I remember you one time describing how dumb Trump was on the campaign trail and in his first year in office, when he was talking tough on China and wanted to level all of these taxes on Chinese imports and stuff. And you were like, he's a fucking idiot because he's got a fucking sledgehammer that he could just shove right down China's throat, and he just fucking threw it off the boat into the water.
why?
Well,
What was the
basically
implication?
you were implying that if you wanted to box China in economically in a
Oh,
global economy, then the move was obviously to bring the entire Asia Pacific into the
to
orbit and into
embrace
the sphere.
TPP.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly.
this was a problem. There's a book by John Mearsheimer that he came out with about 10 years ago. I wrote a paper on it called Why Leaders Lie. But like John Mearsheimer is this like great international relations thinker who's been like ostracized by DC because the prime center of his career took place during the American unipolar moment. So he's
Hmm.
talking about how realism is still a thing, and the main 30 years that he's like working as a professor, like it's not relevant. He's explaining what will happen down the line and nobody cares. Now he's like probably going to come way into the center. But there's a concept like uh, Trump was not well read enough, in my opinion, or
Hmm.
whatever. Maybe he didn't agree with it. Maybe he understood and just didn't agree. Which was TPP was a giant hammer on China, which
Yeah.
Obama couldn't explicitly say is like, hey, the whole point of TPP is to organize a giant trading bloc, including everybody except China, so that
Yeah.
we can set the rules that are equal and fair for everybody. But we set them. And then if China wants to keep trading with the world, they'll have to accept our rules that we set.
Yeah. Yeah.
And instead, what's been happening over the last decade is, hey, guess what? Like 90% of the country's number one trading partner now in the world is China and
Yep.
not America. So
Hmm.
America is because like, basically because of our strong dollar policy since the 90s. Like Clinton had some really dumb policies, man. Like the Clinton, the first one, the one whose best friend killed himself, apparently. Um, uh, he had this thing
I
called the strong
suicide
dollar.
myself.
Yeah, I love how the CIA kept like, if who's that guy McAfee who was like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
explicitly like they keep threatening to me that once we get you, you're gonna suicide yourself, and then of course he's like explicitly saying, "I will not kill myself. I will not kill myself." He's in a Spanish jail, and like within like a week or something, he's like killed
Yeah.
himself.
It's like 72 hours or something like
Yeah,
that.
okay. It's like, all right, bro. I don't know what McAfee had, but like, yeah, he was too crazy to just like enjoy his weird, crazy orgies in Costa Rica and God knows what. Like, he's tweeting from his like yacht to see that he'll never get me. Like, I hope his Twitter lives forever. Uh,
Yeah,
what were
hopefully,
we
probably
talking about?
not. But we were talking about TPP and
Yeah. Oh, the strong dollar policy. So what ended up
mhm.
happening was the idea was like, oh, America will just like over consume. So like right now, when we trade with countries, it's basically us like snorting up all their goods and services while our like working population just like balloons into these giant Jabba the Hutt gelatinous diabetes patients that are slowly cutting their body parts off to like stave off the diabetes. Like the US population is like over consuming and not working. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, it's really shocking. You don't really see it in true perspective until you go outside like Western culture into a place where people have to like literally physically move their bodies around just to live, um, which doesn't happen in the States. I'm sure both sides of the this coin can't understand the other because both seem so alien. For Americans, not driving yourself in a car to wherever you're going seems extremely foreign, and for probably most people on the planet, never walking anywhere probably is like what?
Dude, this is the conversation I've had with people in Indonesia and other countries where I'm like, yeah, like they're like, I don't understand. America's the richest country in the world. How can you guys have like homeless people and stuff? I was like, well, and then I was like, yeah, a lot of people like they live in their cars. And then people are like, what? Wait, you're saying there are people who have enough money to buy a car, but they can't like own a home? They were like, why are they buying a car before they're like living in a home? Like, and I was like, this is the way everything is set up in America. Like, you can put a car somewhere, like basically anywhere you want, but you can't put a human being there because it's illegal. And they're like, and some people live in their homes, they like live in their cars, and that was like the most mind blowing concept that like we have like
Yeah, it's
massive
completely
homeless.
backward. It's completely backwards. Like a lot of the policy is completely backwards. I mean, that's a side note that we could talk about for like on in forever. But I do want to kind of get back to this this idea we're discussing about America and America's economic sphere of influence. I wonder what the best. I mean, clearly this is not happening at a like intellectual. Well, it doesn't seem to be happening at a very strong intellectual level in DC right now. But like, I wonder what the best foreign policy to pursue would be for the United States at this point. I kind of get the feeling that like one of the things that America really needs to do is kind of reassert its position as a partner for allies. And I think one of the places that we could really start would be in Latin America. Basically, just have good relationships with your neighbors would probably be a very strong policy to pursue. And then, honestly, working with West Africa and the Central African coast seems like a really obvious thing from my perspective that would be great
I
for
haven't
the
seen
United
enough
States to pursue.
research. I've always had this like intuition, but I haven't seen enough research on what percentage of like ethnic heritage leads to trade relations, right? So like if you have a lot of like, it makes sense that the US and Mexico trade a lot because we're right next to each other and physically, and you've got this like complementary set of like labor capital thing where there's lower cost labor and it's physically, it makes sense to trade with Canada and Mexico, right? But like when we have like massive influx 100 years ago or 150 years ago of like Italian immigrants or Irish immigrants, was there an associated increase in trade, right? So like, did America start trading? Was there, you know, obviously there's probably a lag, right? But like, was there a giant spike in trade? And so like, if so with West Africa, what makes me think about is like, okay, so most of the slave descendants came or like some percentage of them, probably the vast majority of like the African ancestry came from West Africa.
Yeah,
However, the cultural,
there's actually a super high concentration in a very specific area. Basically, where Benin
like
and Togo,
Ghana, and
well, basically where Benin and Togo are, there's like a river delta that's I think there's a river that splits the two countries, and there's like a delta into the Atlantic Ocean right there, and I think that was like the biggest port. And if you look at it geographically, it's like to the east is Cameroon, and then to the west is Nigeria, I believe. I'm not super familiar with the geography, but I think to the west is Nigeria, and then Ghana, and then Senegal. And I think there's a huge amount of, or maybe I have it backwards. Maybe it's Nigeria to the east and Cameroon farther east.
well, the thing is
But
like,
whatever it is like you have this concentration in this very specific area, which is just quite interesting, honestly.
yeah, the thing that to me about trade with Africa is there's a couple like, so the thing that I was saying was I don't know if the fact that like culturally those populations were completely cut off, that
Mhm.
there wouldn't be any like uh cultural connection, whereas like Italian Americans and Irish Americans, they brought in like so there's like examples like this. Like I remember when I was studying abroad in France, there were a ton of people from like University of Michigan and stuff who were like Irish descent, and they were like, we're doing St. Patty's Day in Ireland. And so like, I don't know, like 200 people from that school, they just like all descended in Ireland. Like in St. Patrick's Day in Ireland is like a somber religious event, and they like flew in and like partied like crazy. And they were like driving up like massive amounts of like tourism, but also the locals were like, what the hell? I remember reading articles about it at the time where like all these like Americans of Irish descent are like destroyed our culture and all this stuff. And like I don't, so like that is one area of like economic connection that makes total sense to me. And the same way with like Taiwanese Americans and Chinese Americans, like the TSMC founder, he actually worked in Dallas at Texas Instruments, right? And because basically, I don't know if the exact reason is because he was Asian, like that they didn't make him CEO, but he was like the most like, he was in the running to be like running to run Texas Instruments. Hey, how's it going? Hold on one second. Yeah, sorry, I'm just doing a podcast. Nice to see you. So they so anyways, he goes back to Taiwan and he's like already old and he's like obviously like a genius. And then the Taiwanese government funds him, and then he creates TSMC, and it's this like, you know, global chip maker that's like surpassed Intel, right? And so a lot of like Chinese trade between the US and China and like East Asian trade is like the point people that like facilitated a lot of that were Chinese descent people and Chinese immigrants and all that, right? So there may have been, and so I don't know if it makes a difference because I don't think the Europeans have much Chinese immigrants in their populations, but they also have like large amounts of trade between Europe and China. So that was the whole point of what I'm saying is like I don't know how much of ethnic populations moving makes any difference with trade.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess the most relevant historical precedent may be the Silk Road, um, because or the Roman Empire. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting to think about because I guess ultimately what you really care about is can you get goods and services at better price or better value, and um, cultural connections only matter so far generally in commerce. Like people can be extremely ethnocentric in their kind of ideations or impulses or feelings, but ultimately when commerce comes in, like people tend to not care that much about who they're trading with if they feel like they get good value for what they're purchasing.
Yeah. So with West Africa, like I still don't know. That was the thing that I was thinking about is like I know they have a lot of coffee and like did you hear the
Yeah,
Mawia
chocolate.
discussion?
Yeah, it was a good one.
So like Nigeria is this like I don't know, monster sized country that's growing at super fast rates and has like in terms of
It
population
has
growth
like
and
it has it. I think it has like some almost like a third of the continent's population right now.
they're like yeah, I mean they're just like growing like crazy. Like I don't know if they're it reminds me a lot of like India, China kind of stuff where like you've got this like I remember reading about I think this was 20 years ago that like India would birth the population of Australia every year. And so like you had to like get those demographics in your head to like properly understand the world because like
Yeah.
the Australia has like an outsized like role in our minds even though like any
hmm
given year India is like making new Australias. Uh,
Yeah.
so like yeah,
That's
Nigeria I think might be like a big source of um, maybe talent, like but I don't know finished goods and services. Like I don't know what they're producing
well. I
other than
think
oil.
one of the things that we've talked about conceptually that was reaffirmed on that Malia is how you say his name, right?
Yeah,
On the podcast that you did with him was the idea that um, talent is kind of spread out globally, but the internet makes it very accessible. And what has happened is that people of our generation who are from non-Western countries have had the opportunity to travel to and study in Western universities and establish a professional network after graduation in those countries. And now they can actually go back, but still participate in a knowledge economy from anywhere on the planet. And I mean that's a huge revolution in marketplaces and how labor is dispersed and accessible around the planet. And obviously, crypto is going to play a big part of this story. But I think kind of taking back to what I was kind of pondering a second ago was like, what can the U.S. government do to kind of reaffirm a strategic position, its own strategic position, and reposition itself for this new century that it's coming into? And one of the things that the African continent is deficient in right now, and is also true of the Latin America, most of South America, and a lot of Central America. Is you remember that map I shared with you like 3 weeks ago or so on the Discord channel, and it was basically showing like the rail networks and the electricity
oh
networks
yeah,
around the
they're
planet.
super under infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly, right. So like you have China going all over the planet right now, very strategically building ports, building transportation infrastructure, whether it's highways, pouring tons of concrete, building train networks. And it's like, if there's any race that the United States probably could and should get into. It's like utilizing, just rediscovering infrastructure technology and
Like
moving
physical
it around.
infrastructure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
literally moving it around the planet and doing it at high speed, high efficiency, high quality, to get new markets into the orbit of the United States. Because otherwise, it's just going to get left behind. I mean, like, the one thing that I think Balaji has done a great job of kind of synthesizing in his thesis about crypto and basically the upcoming century is that, like, the United States is the top dog, but it's so lethargic and moves so slowly because of like regulatory capture and corruption. There needs to be like a total rethinking of how policy is pursued in the country, because if there isn't, it's just going to lag,
Yeah,
and empires can rise and fall like all the
I
time.
think in moments of technological stasis, you could make the
Hmm.
argument what causes the stasis, but let's just say it's not caused by the government. It just is because you might be in a period of, let's say the technology is not like changing that much. In these moments, like it makes a ton of sense to have, you can in a 10 or 20-year period, like you can have strong central governments do move things a lot, especially if you're from a low base. So like one of the things about China that impresses people, and this is what impressed people about the Soviet Union post World War II, is first of all, like Europe is destroyed and the rest of the world is Japan is nuked, Europe is destroyed, and there's just America and the Soviet Union, right? And they had
Hmm.
lost like, I think they had lost like a ton of their men and
20,
stuff.
20, I think 20 million Russians died or something like that
Yeah.
during the war.
And basically almost every single male in the country either fought or died in the war. So like you fought and were wounded or you died. So like every man in that country had to deal with that war. Whereas in America,
Same.
it was a big percentage of the men population, but it wasn't everybody. What's funny is, so like everybody was impressed with the Soviet Union because like they were building a rail, and they had this giant industrial economy, and also the Russian population was coming from a more backwards position than relative to the U.S. economy. And so this is what's been impressing everybody about China is like you and I are like salivating over like, man, you can ride a 200-mile-per-hour bullet train for $10, right? I used to commute from Shanghai to Nanjing and back, and like to take advantage of two markets and ride bullet trains like they're metros. Like you just hop on and
Hmm.
like go 200 miles away, do some business and come back as if you were like, riding the local
It's like
bus.
yeah, it would be like kind of traveling between Dallas and Fort Worth in Texas.
Yeah, and you're on your smartphone at 4G speeds, like watching something on YouTube, or YouTube's blocked but with a VPN. So in periods where like the government can just like spend money and like build out infrastructure, you can see really impressive growth, and this is what I think tricks people into falling in love with like strong central governments.
Hmm.
However, uh all they did was like double down and triple down on um, 1960s Japanese technology, right? So it was
Hmm.
easy for their minds as like a government actor to be like, look, I'll just need to, all we have to do is straighten out these lines, run them at fast speeds, and turn all our mega cities into like nodes we'll turn the whole country into a giant subway system. Like, so governments
Hmm.
are generally like, that's why they love doing infrastructure projects and stuff. And I'm not trying to like shit on the Chinese bullet train system, it's amazing. However, in the absence, if you in our period of like right now, I think you and I are in agreement that like we're in a period of like hyper acceleration in technologies. Like there's been
Hmm.
enough like baking under the surface that there are like tons of new technologies that are ready to go, like hyperloops and autonomous cars and all this other stuff that's coming.
Yeah.
And the only reason, as far as we can tell, that this stuff isn't being built, like the fact that the fact that the San Francisco Bay Area has this piddling population, whereas like the demand for the population would have been like the San Francisco Bay Area would be probably 3 times the population it currently is if they had like normal governance and like were allowed to build human habitable infrastructure, like things, like if they were allowed to build houses and stuff. So there
Or
was so
just
much.
not encourage, or just not encourage depravity.
Yeah, there's a combo, right? And in the US, like you could see like if the US government like deregulated things that uh, weren't were not having the negative intended consequences, like the fact that
Mhm.
the Golden Gate Bridge was built in like a year, and then the San Francisco government just spent 20 years opening a toilet, and then they literally used their fingers to cut toilet roll, and they had this like proud moment, like we opened a toilet after 20 years. That's like a cartoonish level of insanity. You know, the Chinese
Yeah,
circulate this meme.
the picture of five people with their like $3,000 cameras taking pictures of the toilet was pretty ridiculous.
Dude, it's insane. The Chinese, when the Trump administration was doing negotiations with the Chinese 3, 4 years ago, they circulated this meme all over the world showing on one side of the table were all these like 30-year-old
Yeah.
healthy pink with blood in their cheeks Chinese people. This was not a doctored photo, just like 10 competent, fluent in both Chinese and English, competent people. On the Trump side of the table, on the America side of the table, were like, I think the youngest person was like 70 years old. It was between 70-year-olds and 80-year-olds, centenarians and
Oh, no, no,
whatever.
no. They were probably in their mid 50s, but they just looked like they were 70
No, no,
because they
they
were
were
so
old as
decrepit.
shit. They were
I know
Trump's
what you mean.
age. They were
Yeah,
crotchety and
it
old,
was like
all
Wilbur Ross
gray-haired
and stuff.
white dudes. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's a photo that we used to make fun of the Chinese during the Qing dynasty, because the Qing dynasty at the end of its life was run by these decrepit old mandarins who kept blocking progress. And that's what's
Mhm.
happening in the US. We have
Well, the
decrepit
parallel,
old. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I mean, you're right. And the parallels run so much deeper because when we were exporting opium, or the West was exporting opium into China, I mean, whether it's intentional from a state sanctioned perspective or not, like China is just flooding the United States with
With
fentanyl and
like
opiates
fentanyl that like now I saw
and
the other
meth.
day, dude, I saw the other day on a SNL skit, which is probably the most liberal and woke thing that America has to offer, which and
Yeah,
and
on a mass scale. Yeah.
I had I saw a skit where the guy Che was saying just make sure to test your cocaine for fentanyl so you don't die. I was like, there's so many like layers of insanity in that comment, which it was like you have to understand on a, because that's a mass appeal show, right? Like
Hmm.
everybody who watches and hears that joke needs to have the understanding that first of all, cocaine is fine to snort on a like a recreationally, but second of all, oh, we have this massive fentanyl problem that kills you on upon instant, and we're just like joking about it. It's like, damn, dude, like what's going on with the U.S.?
I mean, did you see the numbers that got published this week? Is 100,000 overdose deaths last year. It's up like 30% year over year or something like that.
And the only thing that rivals it is the 10x deaths of COVID, the million deaths on COVID and 100,000 from
Yeah,
fentanyl.
yeah. I mean, we basically have two side side by side epidemics that are happening.
One
One is
kills the old and fat, and the other kills uh, the young who want to party.
the young and depressed, I guess.
I mean, yeah. And I mean, the thing is like, you could make the argument, oh, this is related to lockdowns, but I'm pretty sure this problem was accelerating at a massive scale before
I mean,
Corona.
I think 2019 there were still 70,000 opioid overdose deaths. So it's not like this problem just sprang up because of COVID. I mean, that would be the most disingenuous argument you could possibly make, which I'm sure someone will try to do, but it would be completely inaccurate.
I told you when I was in Austin, uh, I was there a couple times in the last couple of years, and I just, I just couldn't help because I'm always traveling and stuff, and I just couldn't help but notice like how dystopian some parts of Austin were. Like, because I'm
So ugly.
cheap, I would rather buy Bitcoin than spend $100 on a hotel. So I spent whatever $50 on a hotel, and a $50 hotel versus $100 hotel it's like night and day. I was on the side of a highway, and I had tattooed like people, not tattooed like in Bali tattooed where it's like fun and cool and people surf, like tattooed like the art on their body was hiding the like track marks of like heroin. And I was just like, you know, there was, this is like one of the richer cities in the country, and you know,
It's just sad. I mean, like, I'm not gonna like make judgments on people individually, or their personal choices, but if you just like take a step back and look at the kind of suffering that's happening at scale in the United States, it's just sad. I mean,
you've got to
I don't
compress
know.
demand. You've got to stop, in my opinion. Like the whole idea was like with ending the war on drugs and like decriminalizing marijuana, the idea was we shouldn't be putting people in jail for life or 10-20 years, robbing their whole life because they like to smoke weed. Like I think most people were on board with that, but then we've gone past that, in my opinion, in the as a culture in the US, where it is like venerated and lauded to smoke weed. And what you have is these outlier people who are exceptionally productive while constantly doping themselves on weed. Who knows what Seth Rogen would be able to do? Probably his ancestors would have like discovered nuclear fission, and this guy's making pickle dick jokes or whatever he does. And like so that's fine. Like he's hyper productive, and like, you know, these people in our culture are like promoting something that I think is not
I mean,
healthy for people.
yeah, I agree with what you're saying. And also just to take it a step further, I was, you know, there's two things that I saw earlier today that were just happenstance that I saw them simultaneously. The first was that I flipped on the TV, and I have like a smart TV that's internet enabled. So I basically just watch stuff on apps, but as part of like the actual TV hardware, it's a Samsung TV. They have basically like a streaming software package that's like all of the ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox streaming networks just like are plugged in to the software on the TV, and it just was like on the NBC like live streaming show or whatever. And apparently, the Biden administration is distributing drug kits with the like idea of like keeping people alive or whatever. So I guess there's Narcan, or there's
the
clean
Narcan,
needles,
yeah.
but also there's like crack pipes in these distribution kits, right? And Republicans are going fucking nuts about it, and I think rightly so. Which is like you can't use you can't use taxpayer money to distribute equipment to ingest
How about you
narcotics.
send people instant COVID tests instead of crack pipes? Like this used to be, I can't tell. The Onion has no utility anymore. The Onion,
Yeah,
because it's like everything that they would make fun of is real, and so like, that's why, yeah, a guy like Trump, who's the epitome of idiocracy come to life. That's why like the Dems are like, we got to recruit The Rock, who's literally was in the running probably to play President Camacho in
Camacho.
Yeah. So it's like Terry Crews or The Rock. Let's go with Terry Crews because he can rock that wig better. And instead, it's like they're actually recruiting The Rock, right? So it's, I mean, yeah, the U.S. We're in a very interesting time, and maybe we're just like at the cutting edge of what technology is doing. But I don't know.
Here's the thing that happened in parallel that I found so kind of bizarre about seeing that news report. And then simultaneously, I opened up Twitter, and there was like a thread that the guy who wrote San Francisco was publishing of like interviews of like homeless people in San Francisco talking about how they are literally they are literally moving to the city. I don't want to use I don't want to talk hyperbolically, so I won't say flooding, but there are literally people intentionally moving into the city because they're getting literally paid money by the city government. It's like $620 a week or something like that.
Yeah,
Plus
that's like normal incentives. Incentives work. If you pay people to move to yours, I should go to San Francisco and register.
But you got to be homeless. You have to be homeless. You can't.
How
like
often
if you
do
have
they check?
I have no idea. but probably not that
I
hard.
now you're giving me a
But
great business idea. I wonder if I can. I'm just kidding. I was like, oh,
well,
maybe
I
I
actually
could just
saw
get a bunch of my friends
on
to
a
register as
on,
homeless, and then we
yeah
can
on
move back to Bali.
you know, it'd be funny actually if you got a group of like 100 and you raised like what would that be, $62,000 a week? Basically, you could fund a startup with
Yeah,
with
let's create a homeless DAO, and then like
yeah.
invest it in Bitcoin, and we'll all move to like. We'll then take the money and all move to what is
And
it?
so
Surf
how
City
did you
in
get well?
El
Yeah,
Salvador.
yeah. How did you get wealthy? Well, I created a Bitcoin wallet and I took the
Yeah, and
$620 a week for the homeless stipend, and then I just kind of kept showing up phantomly until I amassed enough money, and then moved.
yeah, no, it's really true. What I've
I'm sure
noticed
you
is
could do
that
it.
what I've noticed around the world and is um, there's the U.S. still attracts the super far edge cases of like IQ and ambition on the bell curves and whatever the curves are
Mhm,
for like hyper productive and ambitious driven people. Uh,
mhm,
However you want to measure their talents, though the U.S. still attracts those people to some degree and maybe still above average of everybody else, but the regular talented people who want all the normal things. The US, like over the 20th century, was always this like, do you know this concept of Shelling point, where like
mhm.
everybody wants to, if you want to meet up, if you're looking for the other talented person, you're like, okay, let's all go meet up at the Empire State Building because we can all see it. And we'll just try to guess where, if you're trying to coordinate with someone else without having ever met or known them, like, I need to go to Harvard because that's where I'm going to meet the other smart people, right? I need to go to Caltech, or I need to go to San Francisco. Like, I have an idea and
Stanford,
ambition.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go
Mhm.
to Silicon Valley and make a company. I don't know anybody, but I'm going to just go there. Like the US used to be
Yeah,
like that.
LA, Hollywood. Yeah.
And we're not attracting that anymore, partly COVID, partly like the fact that the US is, we made it so hard to just come, like
Mhm.
unless you're from Europe or Japan or Korea where you can come for 90 days without visa free, like if you're a top talent and you want to come and so our immigration policy and things like that like really make it super hard. And people in the US, especially in DC, they act like America's the only place with iPhones. They act like America's the only place with Wi-Fi
Yeah.
and cappuccinos. It's like, no, man, everybody has copied that. Whatever made America special in the last 100 years,
Yeah.
all of that has been leveled out. Everything is exactly the same all over the planet. iPhone sales are everywhere. So if you want to have something that makes you a better platform than other places, like we have to level up all these other places.
Yeah, there's a definite need for innovation in the United States. I think it definitely needs to start at the urban scale, like we've talked about in at other times, where just building tighter, walkable communities that are not car dependent, and probably goes so far as to just remove cars almost entirely from the specter of the urban space. I will say this though, and you've talked about this before. I don't know if you've talked about it on your podcast or not. There are some key advantages that the United States still has structurally. Obviously, the fundamental strength of property rights in the United States is, I mean, it's literally a founding principle of
I
the
would
nation.
say, just to footnote the property rights thing, I think it's now broken down into state by state because I'm dealing with physical
Hmm.
properties in different geographies. And
Hmm.
what I found is that some cities have completely eroded the property rights. Like they're basically, cities have turned communist. Like I don't care what's happening with property prices in San Francisco. I'm not buying property there. Like the
Hmm.
price would have to fall a lot and I'd have to smell or anticipate a change in political power to invest in those types of properties. So like,
I was
but you're
explaining
right.
this to, I mean, I was explaining this to that exact problem is happening in Austin right now because the price has appreciated like 60% in probably 15 months. I mean, I think this is the most expensive city in the country right now
It's
on a lot
it's
of
it
metrics because the supply of housing is so low and the demand is sky high.
I told you
Um,
this whatever a year ago when I was there, which was Austin is the worst value for money place I've ever been to because it's like has the prices of like I went to Moscow. I've been to the two most expensive cities in my life that I ever went to at the time that I went because the currencies were so expensive were Tokyo and Moscow. And Moscow had like like the Louvre level of art in their metros. They had like the infrastructure of the entire country was just like all the wealth of the country is poured into Moscow, and so it was awesome. Like I don't mind paying $8 for a coffee in Moscow as I walk the streets and see random supermodels. You know, fine, it's visually appealing and beautiful. I go to Austin and it's like a wooden ramshackle hut that's like giving me a cappuccino and like the people are normal looking but everybody's tatted up like crazy. It looks like a dystopian hellhole from like Honduras or something. I remember seeing a documentary about Honduras prisons and I was like, why are these like beautiful people in Austin making themselves look like Honduran criminals? But okay, let's put that aside. uh, you're
I
getting
50
like
for, yeah,
yeah,
go
like
ahead.
in if you're in Tokyo or Paris and you're paying high prices for your coffees or your food or like the basic things people spend on a daily basis, you're getting something for it. I'm sitting next to a 1,000-year-old wall in Cambridge, UK, right? And I'm in this
Mhm.
beautiful college town. In Austin, you're like, oh, here's a giant elevated highway. It's like the Great Wall of China, except it's horrible and spewing noxious fumes in your face, and I can hear it from like half a mile away. Okay, well, here's a empty parking lot in the middle of downtown. Here's random homeless people. So I'm like, on the one hand, Austin is you're pricing in the future. So like
Mhm.
I'm playing like San Francisco prices for without San Francisco's beautiful Bay Area beauty. So like
Mhm.
Austin that's why when I wanted to invest in property in Austin, I was like, I want to go exactly outside of the city limits. So like I
Yeah,
don't have to deal with their insane communist imported Silicon Valley thinking. Do you know what I mean? Sorry, continue.
my one of my friends calls them the city council Sandinistas.
Yeah, it's like they're acting like they're San Francisco and everybody by default has to uh like the thing is like when you're acting like you've made it before you made it, it was like when LeBron said I'm going to have 8 titles in Miami and then the Dallas Mavericks beat the shit out of them and took a title, right? Like good.
Yeah, in five
Like
games or something.
yeah, Austin is definitely going to be the city of the future. Everybody decided like, all right, F it, let's just all move to Austin. All the talent in the country is like, all right, we got to like a free city in America, and it's cool enough, and it's got culture. We could have the America could have decided let's all move to Nashville, right?
Yeah.
Like there was a couple other cities in the running to be like the next big great city, the boomtown.
Yeah. I will say this about Austin. There's two, there's one overriding thing that matters about this city, and that is there's probably not going to be a better place to make money over the next 10 to 15 years in the United States
Depends on what your job is.
if you are in the right industries. If you are not in those correct industries, you are going to find life here to be exceptionally painful financially because the cost of living is so astronomically high and the pay, quite frankly, the pay is Texas pay primarily, which is not that good of pay
The cost
on
of
the
living
on the
relative to
average.
what you're getting. I don't mind
Mhm.
dude, you'll know I've made it in life where instead of me spending my summers on the Turkish coast because of their cheap lira, I'm spending my summers on the Italian coast next to Capri, Italy on my yacht. Then you'll know I've made it through watching my Instagram. Until then, why would
I don't
anybody
watch
sit
that.
in
I don't care.
yeah, well you will. Why would anybody sit in Austin if they don't have to be there? Right? Like
Yeah.
if you're not there to like network
Hmm.
and stuff, and then the problem with Austin, in my opinion, is okay, we have this Shelly point where everybody, Joe Rogan and Elon Musk and Tesla's biggest factory and all the engineers are moving there, all the like chip
Apple,
fabs.
Google,
Yeah,
Facebook,
everybody.
Samsung.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got to at least make a human based city. Otherwise, I guess, I mean,
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe people are networking enough with their cars, but like when you have a human being based city, like the volumetric space you need is much less because a human being doesn't take up that much space compared to a car. So like,
Mhm.
I don't know. I have my I think like a better Austin is again reminds me of like the problem of Delhi, India, where they're like everybody's got to like move here. Let's just make New Delhi. Like Delhi, old Delhi can stay. We're just gonna make a new one down the street. And like everybody
Mhm.
who's quote unquote moving to Austin, I have a feeling that they're gonna build like Musk and company are gonna build like a mega city down the street just outside of Austin. Like
Yeah, on the other side of um, on the other side, on the east side of that factory is basically the Travis County, Bastrop County line. And Bastrop, the city, which is also on the Colorado River, is about 15 miles down the highway from where that plant is. And quite frankly, there are areas on that. We've talked about this before, but there are areas where the river bends in Bastrop that are gorgeous. They're not quite as scenic as Austin is. If you were to strip away all the concrete that's been poured in Austin, it's quite frankly a beautiful place because it's got these massive hills and very all these amazing trees and this incredible river that cuts through this limestone bedrock to make these deep gorges and all these things.
you're
But
saying the actual Austin city, if the buildings weren't there, that just the area itself would have been pretty, regardless of if
yeah,
there was a city there.
yeah,
So so
the geography is beautiful, right?
so
Like the
15
geography
minutes east of Austin is
is
doesn't have the
not
same beauty.
correct. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but it's not ugly either. Like they're so I think this is there's a little pocket in Bastrop County called Lost Pines, and back in 2011 there was like a massive forest fire where like 30% of this pine forest burned, and it's
Mm-hmm.
starting, even that part's starting to regrow because pine trees are pretty resilient. But basically, um, I think as Texas has dried out, I think most of the Texas coast probably used to be pines, or at least there was like large amounts of pine forest that extended as far west as Austin is. And that's no longer the case anymore. You hear about like the pine curtain in Texas. It's all basically East Texas, like Highway 45 and east into Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, blah, blah, blah. But there's a section in Bastrop called Lost Pines on the Colorado River that's this amazing pine forest, right? And even though you don't get 800-foot tall hills and these peaks and these big limestone cutout valleys and stuff like that, you still get these nice bluffs with these big pine trees and
Yeah, that's awesome.
these really beautiful things, right? And it's just down the road, and it's literally right now a third the cost of Austin. The problem
For
is,
now.
yeah, the problem is there's only one route. Actually, there's only two routes into Austin from the east, but from Bastrop itself, there's only one primary route, and it's on this highway called Texas Highway 71. As you drive in, you have to go through a series of traffic lights until you get to the main highway. So, and there's no rail system. So like commuting from Bastrop today into the city of Austin takes about an hour with all the traffic. You can probably get from Bastrop to the Tesla plant in 30 to 45 minutes, depending on where you're coming from. But I think this is an area, and this is an area that I kind of wanted to talk to you about. I think that Tesla, and I presume this to be the case, and I've kind of heard some anecdotal evidence that this is the case, is I think that one of the things that Tesla could do in pairing with the Boring Company is develop a massive infrastructure transit network to kind of redo a lot of Austin itself, but also probably extend the infrastructure out to the periphery of Austin to create these massive explosions of cities on
I
the
think what they
periphery.
should do, I think because there's so much I would take a slightly different take of what you're saying, and maybe we're saying the same thing, is I think they should just start where there's nothing and
Mm.
on outside the county lines and start building their network, because they don't have a friendly government like Las Vegas. So in Vegas, they're literally going parallelizing
Actually, that's not.
what's under the
Actually, that's
strip.
not true. Yeah, that's
Yeah. So
apparently this is not true.
if I mean, there's rumors that I've been following. So if Austin does become super friendly, and then they do, you have to uh it's got to be partly economic, and the only way to make this stuff really work is like if you induce tunneling, right?
Hmm.
So the idea is the roads used to be the if you ever took like economics, what is it called, there's this concept called natural monopoly. Do you ever remember that from like one of your econ classes? It's like, why don't you have 10, why are there only like one or two providers for like fiber internet to your house? Is because like it doesn't make
It's fucking
sense to have
expensive.
10 companies. Yeah, it's expensive. So you really only have one. Why don't you have 50 roads to your house? Because there's it doesn't physically make any sense to wrap your house in 10 different roads. One road is appropriate, right? And then so what
Hmm.
happens is that's why roads are always have tended to be like the base level government provision, because you can't have a private company running monopoly rents on you to prevent you from coming and going from your own house. So like that's why roads were never, almost never run privately. And so whenever you do see private roads in the world, they usually either take one of two options. They're like build, operate, transfer models, where they're like, we'll make our profit like baked into the tolls, and then we'll turn it over to the government or whatever, right? Or they're like parallel roads, like whatever that like George W. Bush Highway in Dallas is. It's like if you don't
Hmm.
want to pay the like $5 tolls to save yourself 20 minutes, then just take the other 50 highways that are like, every 2 miles there's a highway, right? So yeah, if you ever want to come for tourism, come look at our beautiful concrete. It's like amazing. There's concrete as far as the eye can see. Um, but with the tunnels, what'll happen is, okay, so you've now eliminated the physical limitations. So there's this concept of induced demand, right? The more road you build, the more cars will go on those roads. So that's why like they keep widening highways, and then they're like, why is there still traffic? It's like you just made it easier to have more cars in, so it's inducing cars to use this road,
Yeah,
and they
you
jam
want
up again.
multiple. Yeah, you want multiple networks.
It's
You want a
literally,
network where you have multiple arteries of movement.
yeah, it's like if there's if there's a pipe letting water come down a dam, and you make the pipe wider, you're like, why is there more water coming through this pipe? I just made it bigger. It's like it'll jam up to the limit of whatever the pipe is. So that's just how it works. And so if you have induced demand and you're gonna just keep building more roads, even underground, right? On the surface, those cars, unless you're like permanently storing the cars underground, because the storage of the cars is really the like at some point those cars are going to have to come back to the surface, and you're going to have, 2 or 3 stacked roads of cars coming back to the surface, which would jam up the place. So you have to pair the boring company with congestion pricing.
Autonomous.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
congestion. So if the goal is like, if we're going to make a human-centered surface area, aka a city where human beings can exist, we have to limit what's the appropriate amount of volumetric metal moving around, whether it's autonomous or human driven. Nobody
Yeah.
wants to live. That's why we don't build our houses in the middle of highways, because even though it'd be super convenient to just hop in your car right out your front door and drive on the highway, we don't do that because nobody wants to be surrounded by high-speed cars everywhere. Or we don't build our houses randomly in Walmart parking lots because nobody wants to be surrounded by cars, even though that would be like convenient.
Well, I had this, so I had this actual, so this is, first, I agree with a lot of the points that you're making right now, but I had this very interesting conversation about the actual engineering that's going to go into the tunnel network. So there's two things that are happening simultaneously. You have like private industry with Tesla and the Boring Company, parking its butt in Austin, and then simultaneously you have the city of Austin that just raised like a $7 billion bond to build basically a subway metro network under the ground. And even though there's not a lot of public publishing about this, my understanding is that Musk is pushing really hard to get the contract to build the tunnel network um, with the city of Austin. Here's the interesting thing that I found about the specifics of Austin. So I was having a conversation with a guy who does foundations for all the skyscrapers that they're building downtown, and
Okay.
he was telling me some very interesting things about one, how they build those foundations. So, and two, like the actual geology of the city of Austin. So, um, underneath the ground in Austin, there's basically multiple layers. You have a basically a 20-foot to 40-foot deep, really hard, just slab of limestone that the city sits on top of. You can basically imagine like you have these stacked geological formations of different types of dirt. So on the top layer, that's just underneath the dirt on the surface, is this massive, super dense, super hard rock of limestone.
So
And
the
I'm
skyscraper, if they're plugged in, they only have to go as deep as a limestone to maintain
no, so
stability.
it depends, right? It just depends. Some
How tall the
buildings,
skyscrapers are?
yeah, probably how tall, how heavy it is. Also, what's right underneath it, which is, so you have this big slab of limestone, and then underneath that, you have another, let's say, 20 to 60 feet of clay, which is soft clay that can move. And then underneath that clay, you have another bed of limestone. So you have this like multi-layered system
You
of
have
rock
two
and
rock
clay.
layers with
Yeah, that like
clay in
sandwich of,
between.
yeah, like a sandwich of clay in between. And interestingly about the city of Austin is there's a fault line, an inactive fault line that literally runs right through the city. And the Capitol of Texas building sits right on top of this fault line. So when they were digging the underground parking garages like 15, 20 years ago, whatever it was, they dug through the limestone and they like were literally right on top of the fault line. And I actually asked the engineer, I was like, so does the state of Texas or the city of Austin like engineer for a fault line if it were to ever slip? And he was like, no, not really. He's like, it's probably a really bad idea. But
Did I
there's
ever tell you
no,
I swam in a tectonic plate? Iceland sits on the North American and European tectonic plate. It's like right in the sits on top of
yeah.
it, and there's a
Hmm.
place where you can swim where the water is the cleanest water in the world because it's like filtered through all this volcanic rock, and
Yeah.
so you can swim and you can look down because the
This is
water's so
fresh water. This is fresh water.
it's fresh water, but it's hyper filtered through volcanic rock. So it's
It's
fed
awesome.
this thing is fed through a spring that's been
Mm,
filtered through like I don't know miles of volcanic rock. The guy was saying it's coming from far away. It's where they filmed Game of Thrones. So there's a place
hmm.
next to that filming area of Game of Thrones where you can swim, and the water's ice cold, so you have to wear all this protection, and you can just with goggles on the surface you can look down and see you can look down into the tectonic plates of North America and Europe, and you can just see active fault lines. And
Yeah.
it's quite amazing. Yeah, like there are some points on Earth where
So you
that
can actually
you can
do
see
that
it.
here, and you can actually do that here in Texas as well. If you go down to San Marcos, the Balcones fault line basically extends for, I think it's a couple hundred miles, and it basically cuts right down I-35. And down in San Marcos, you can go into these caves, and you can actually stand right underneath the fault line, and you can see where the
Wait,
limestone
the
rocks are
caves are
sitting.
underneath the fault line because it's
Yeah.
only
So
30 feet.
yes, so you can see where the two rocks are like precariously sitting on
uh,
top of one another. And I
just
remember
through
asking,
tension.
yeah, and I remember asking the guy, I was like, so why don't they slip? And he was like, well, there's no tension that's pushing anything anymore. So these are like super old fault lines, and now they're just at rest. Um, I mean, look, I suppose these things could move, right? Like, let's say all the glaciers on the planet melt and all that water that's weighing down mountains in the Arctic, like just dissipates off the mountain, and you get this massive like seesaw effect of the continents as weight distribution changes. You could probably reactivate a lot of these fault lines, but for now they're just inactive, which is like, I wonder how many fault lines are like that around the planet. But
Yeah. So
anyway,
with Austin, yeah. What were you saying? Like,
well, so anyway, I had this interesting conversation with this guy. So like he's talking about these multiple layers of how Austin, the sediment in Austin works, and apparently the boring company tunneling machines are really good at going through clay. So he was actually telling me his company was really interesting because they do skyscraper foundations. So what they do is they drill piers,
Yeah, it's like a
they
it's like
drill,
a
yeah, beams
it's
like
like
way
golf
down.
shoes holding, like with, you know, those golf shoes with nails and like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So you go super far down, and then you do like pier and beam to like do your pour or whatever. He was also telling me that his company also does tunnel rescuing. So like that boring tunneling machine that got stuck in Seattle,
The
apparently.
TBM, what, Bertha up in Seattle, where they were
Yeah, like
getting, yeah,
yeah,
his
exactly. So it was
company dug it
his
out.
company dug it out. So basically they had to like dig out the hole, excavate the hole, and like make sure it was like they did the engineering to make sure that like the
The wall
dig out
doesn't
was like
collapse.
brace and collapse. Yeah, so they can move the
Okay.
tunnel out. And what he was telling me, so I asked him, I was like, well, what did the thing hit? And he was like, well, they don't really know, but oftentimes with these tunneling machines is you have tunnels that are really good at going through hard rock like limestone or
Yeah,
granite
it's
or
way
whatever.
easier at Hard Rock.
Yeah, and then you have different types of machines to go through clay. So I think these boring company machines are maybe they're better at going through clay or something. So basically, what he was saying was that the plan as it stands right now is you basically what you would do with these tunnels in Austin is you have the kind of foundation network that goes into the ground of all the buildings all around the city, and they penetrate really deep. So the tunnels are going to have to go around the pre-existing foundations of all these buildings. So they're basically just going to follow the street network, but underneath the ground.
Or they can go
Which
deeper.
I mean, theoretically you could go deeper, but I think ultimately you're probably going to run into another layer of limestone that's going to
Yeah.
be very difficult to get through. So I don't know how deep you can
Is he
necessarily
aware
go.
of the patent that was some internet sleuth on the internet on Twitter found a couple of years ago about the giant earth-eating electric worm that was like, you know, this guy's company digs the pit and then they put the TBM in the pit and then the TBM goes horizontal.
Mhm.
Whereas the patent from Boring Company was the
It's like
truck bed just,
goes,
yeah, it just slides off the back like a slug, starts eating dirt and creating like a ramp path for itself into the, and just like, so like the idea is like you could just drop one of Boring Company's TBMs anywhere and it would just
yeah,
like start eating dirt and shitting out tunnel behind it while
yeah.
also producing excess bricks, like it's shitting tunnel and bricks as it like moves through the ground. And so
This is what it used to be that I think it was one of us shared the video with the other of how the and this is one of the great things about like Elon Musk's mind is how do I utilize every atom of material that I'm dealing with here. And so you have all this excess dirt and you just fire it,
yeah,
heat
and
it up and fire it into a brick.
they already have a 50-foot tower made with the world's strongest bricks, right? Oh, I
Yeah,
sent you the video of this guy testing
yeah,
the bricks and he's
yeah,
dropping it from higher and higher. The tunnel boring machine bricks are the strongest Lego design. They're Lego bricks too, by the way. Like they literally
yeah,
look like Legos, which
yeah. They have a
solves
little
another
too like
problem. Yeah, so you could even theoretically dry stack, if they're not too high, you could dry stack the bricks and build yourself like a nice little wall, right? Like
yeah.
uh so I mean
I mean, it's
the
pretty ugly the way it looks right now, but that can be easily refined into
but
something nicer.
that's just
It's like an aesthetic design.
you could change the aesthetics, right?
Yeah.
Like you could put whatever you want on the surface of that. I remember you telling me you love bukkake art, so I was like, oh, just kidding. For if any one person listens to this, uh, oh, it's this guy. He drinks a lot of water and then he goes and graffitis walls with his you know, he's a cancer survivor, so he has radioactive fluids, and you can only see it with night vision goggles or a black
Well,
light.
I think this actually gets into the thing that is so exciting about what Musk is doing and something you and I have talked about so much, which is like you have to look at like all of his businesses as complementary businesses to one another, which I think is when people talk about Tesla, they don't think about Starlink and Boring Company and how the three things interact with one another. And it's I think it's super critical to start thinking through a framework of these things
Well,
in conjunction with one another.
here's why I have a love-hate relationship with Austin, and why I haven't, you know, eventually maybe I'll do a property thing there, but like the thing about Austin is it's the only reason people should go there is because it's like, okay, here's a shelling point of like all, it's for the people, right? It's all these amazing people from the country just decided, let's all just like go to Austin and like live together. And you've got UT Austin, you've got, you know, the Como River is fine, but it's like nothing, you know, it's fine.
Colorado.
So yeah, okay, the Colorado River. And so the idea is like, okay, but we could make a physical space, because the best cities in the world are physical places. There's also natural geography, but the area where Paris is sitting is just nothing. If there's nothing special, there's more beautiful geographic places in France. However, the physical city of Paris, which is man-made structure, is beautiful, right? Like all the beautiful buildings and stuff. So you can have probably a world-class city that tourists from around the world would love to come to, that you could make out of whole cloth, out of nothing, right? We've done this before hundreds of times all over America, all over North America, right? So like that is possible. One thing that makes me more excited about is Starbase Texas, because you could, let's say theoretically, there's two cities in my mind that are coming up associated with our buddy Musk, right? Which is, one is Austin. Everybody's moving to Austin. There's that Terra factory that they're building. The other is, and it already has its own momentum, right? So the trajectory of Austin going from whatever 2 million in the metro area to like, you know, being as big as Dallas is today, like say 8 million or whatever, the Dallas metro area, that's, I think, already baked in as far as I can tell. Obviously, it's not going to go to the moon. I don't anticipate Austin being 80 million people, right? Like, so we're in some early middle part of that S curve that'll taper off at some point. But
Yeah, we're starting to get into like the middle of it pretty solidly.
I would like, everybody, like Starbase has a natural beauty, which is like it's South Padre Island, right? So like you've got this beautiful coastal area that people already go to party. It's not like as nice as like South Beach or you know, Cartagena or any of these places in the Caribbean, but it's like on the edge, and people forget that Miami Beach is a man-made structure. It's not widely understood that Miami Beach is not real. That is a human-made structure from 100 years ago. So like that I would probably be more so I would love to see what happens down there. But like that's the thing, is like in Texas, generally the state is more libertarian, more freedom, and you could see a future where people with good ideas could put together really nice metro areas.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Austin itself has this like I don't know what's the right word, like upside down worldview, like an inverted, I don't know how to describe it without being super negative and mean. Like I'm glad the left, center left, and the left in America is like not mean and racist or whatever. I don't know what the things are that are positive about them. Let's just say like they love homeless people. They love them so much they want to see more of them. Let's put it that way. But the so like that is the biggest thing about cities in America. It seems like every time you build a city, it gets like taken over and Detroitified. I don't know what the right word is.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing is basically when you get a mass influx into the cities, usually it's, well, at least in our generation, it's young, it's millennial, it's progressive in its ideological thinking, and it's there's a drive to be like altruistic, but it's like manifests in really bad policy. Mostly because a lot of people just aren't serious. Like there's a lot of people that just don't think through things very well, and they don't take life very seriously.
Yeah, and I don't know how you can, let's say I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, but like in this current phase, I don't know how you can like look at a Democrat completely uniparty state and look at the way that they've governed themselves and then think like, oh, I want whatever they're doing there, let's copy and paste their government to some other new location because they're doing it so well. It's like, no, what you have are like the worst outcomes possible. And like and so like that's kind of what I'm like concerned about with like property and because I've always had this idea that I want to keep somewhere between 10 and 30% of net worth in hard physical assets around real estate, um, just as like a buffer for higher risk investments, like a barbell strategy. But when you like survey the space in the US, like, okay, well, where should you build it? Like in DC, I think, okay, at least Virginia is like 50% Republican, 50% Democrat, and they're like practical. That's my ambition for Texas, which is like, okay, you don't want like the proudly ignorant, but you also, because, and also like Republican people in the US seem to lean towards uh, Suburbans and SUVs and anti-city, right? And then the people that you think are that like make the cities awesome, which are like artists and musicians and small and immigrants and all these like people that add flavor and make a city awesome, they swing left. Yeah. So you want a city filled with those people, but you don't want those people voting and ruining it. So like you're like, well, what the hell should we do? Like, is everybody just gonna have to lease? And like, you don't get any voting rights on this area because I own it. And like, that's the real key to me.
You're bringing back the Federalist Papers.
No, this is literally like, I'm trying to think like, how can the demand for a high quality city life in America is through the roof. I can feel it, intuit, like I can intuit how high the demand is. However, the problem is the governance and the policy around it is the tricky part, because if you're going, it's not hard to attract capital. Like City DAO already has money. Like real estate is the largest sector in the economy around the world anyways. But then the question is like, if you had a way to like swing global capital, there's people in Asia, like in Indonesia and China and India, who would love to own a piece of US real estate as a way to like buffer their own like to hedge their own portfolios. So amassing massive amounts of capital for real estate projects is not that hard. You could probably blow REITs out of the water. However, let's say we wanted to like build a town or a city out of whole cloth. How do you keep the people who you want to attract and live there and give them a good deal and give them a good, you can live in Disneyland without it being owned by Disney, right? Like, but how do you attract them without having them like, it's like attracting customers to your restaurant without having them ruin the menu with their stupid requests. It's like, no, you came here because I'm the chef and I'm making the food. That's the trick.
I remember I remember when I was in college, I was promoting, me and a couple buddies tried to promote, including Akbar actually, we were trying to promote this like hip hop group, and they were out of Dallas, and this was back in like 2008 and 2009, something like that. And we, at the time, like 6th Street was kind of this like low key but very up and coming place for like people in their early 20s to go to. It was like cheap beer, cheap night out, but a lot of fun because a lot of like young people were congregating in this space. And we went to this club to like have them host this like show or whatever, and they cut us a deal, and they're basically like, all right, your job is to get bodies in the door, and then if we hit we have a minimum threshold of drink sales that we need to hit, and then for everything over that, we do like a profit share on the drink sales or whatever.
Okay.
And that was like basically the way to make money without charging people at the door. Or maybe we charged like a small cover or something at the door, and I think it went to the club. And so the idea we had to get people in to make a really great atmosphere was we had this friend of ours who basically knew someone who was a DJ and did like hip hop music and stuff like that, and they had like a network of friends that would all party and hang out together. And so the idea was like, all right, let's get like 40, 50, 60 of these people to kind of like mass at the door. And then like the whole concept of like crowds, like attracting crowds
Oh,
would,
crowds attracting crowds. That's why like
yeah,
the great restaurants and stuff, they'll have like lines out the door so that
yeah.
people will want to join the line. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so that kind of worked actually. We got probably like 200 people in there, but the people that we used to induce the crowd were like art people that like were into like graffiti and just like ruining spaces that were like private. And I remember at like 2 in the morning, I went and walked into the bathroom and it was like the entire bathroom stalls were like tagged. And this place, this
From the
club was
same
like,
night?
yeah, that same night. This place
Oh,
was like the club was trying to make it like nice and stuff
so
like
your
that. It was
ghetto
like,
crowd ruined their place?
yes, exactly. And not only did they tag everything, but someone took like a knife or something and basically did their tag like etched into the mirror in the
Oh
bathroom.
no.
I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Did you see on Twitter a couple days ago, a crowd of 100 showed up, mobbed in San Francisco, and were moving in large numbers and tagging the whole city, and uh, the rules the San Francisco so effed up. First of all, if you have a gun, you can't shoot them who are for defacing your property. So I'm not saying people should mass shoot another mob. Like I'm not saying like that should be legal. However, you can't do anything, and the police have decided at that point not to enforce it. But second of all, the rule in San Francisco is you are, as a owner of the store, are responsible for removing the graffiti first. So they're not. I don't even know if you can't protect your property from graffiti, and then the store owner is responsible for removing it. So you're like, what kind of weird, perverse tax is this on a store? Right? These stores are in the lowest margin business ever. Physical stores are basically cities are basically they're making 10% or less margins on these places, right? It's not like you're getting, oh, you're the only like what's that? Peter Thiel has a great analogy of like why restaurants are terrible businesses. He's like, well, everybody who ever comes up with a restaurant, they're always like, oh, well, we're going to be the only restaurant serving English food within 50 miles. And he's like, so we have a monopoly on that. And he's like, okay, let's just take off the table that someone else could just copy your menu. But let's just say you're also scoping the market size in such a weird, narrow way. Like you're not the only place. Like if you just scope it out largely, like are you the only place serving European food? Are you the only place serving food? Are you the only place serving calories? Like you could just keep scoping it further and further out that like you're actually like a tiny nothing in a like a giant sea. And so if you don't have like pricing power, your margins are basically the cost of capital. And so you can
Mhm.
see like cities, if you listen to the Maria story, one of the things that I think is so brilliant about what he was trying to do is he had a intuitive and then also thought out understanding about what makes cities work. And like you have to have a core of people uh, that are generating what he and I were described, what I described as export revenue, like earning money from outside. Like a lot of cities in America and around the world are actually just like places where people lived around a specific industry. Like there was like a coal,
Steel
yeah.
manufacturing, or
And the
in
reason
the more modern era, like Dallas has Texas Instruments or ExxonMobil or something like that.
Dallas came out because it was
Airlines or
there's a famous
transit.
story there's a famous story about where like Dallas figured out they bribed or did something that like they got the trains to have their interchange at Dallas instead of Fort Worth. So like Fort Worth was bigger at some point, and then like someone wanted to make a city on the Red River, and then like someone in Dallas figured out a way to like get them to put their train station there. So Dallas went from train station, and then the airport, which the federal government mandated that they like create DFW with the Wright Amendment, and then so like Dallas became this other. They went from trains to planes and trucks. Where remember our story about how the Patels had created a secret like
Motel
price fixing
cartel.
scheme, yeah, cartel on like fixing the prices of motels, and like Dallas
I
was a
love
big
how
hub.
I love how that side note is starting to penetrate into like the
The
broad
wider public,
newspaper like magazine market, and no one is actually like losing their fucking shit about how one family owns like 50% of the
Well,
motels
well,
in the United
okay,
States.
okay, wait. First of all, let's make it clear. It's not exactly one family. Patel is like
Oh, I'm sorry,
a
tribe,
surname.
tribe,
Yeah,
tribe.
it's a family name from a state in India called Gujarat, and so they just like it's like saying the Kims took over dry cleaning. It's like not they're all not cousins. I mean, they're kind of cousins in a broad
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, like in
But
a tribal way, in a tribal kind of way.
yeah, I mean, it's honestly fascinating.
I
The
think
next time,
your
go ahead.
story about how they were like meeting at like a Ramada in Houston or in Dallas and Arlington or something to like price fix the entire industry was pretty funny.
Yeah, you know what was so funny is my mom's friend owned motels and stuff, and she's Pakistani descent. She's from Pakistan, immigrated to the U.S., and she also owned some hotels, and she got invited to some meeting or whatever, and like everybody tables their like old world grudges for like business in America, right?
Money, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and so what was so funny is my mom is just telling a story. Like my mom's like an older lady, and she's just telling me a story about, oh, you know, what's her name, Auntie, and her three. And I always don't remember who's who. And she's like, oh, this kid's son. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, I know her. And she was telling me some random story about like how she was invited to this hotel group run by a bunch of Indian men, and like how she would like they wanted to like organize prices, and she was like, that's dumb, I don't want to participate, and like left. And I was like, holy shit, I read about that like on the news. She was actually like a participant in that, and how like she just like was like, no, I'm not doing it, like whatever, I don't like want random people. But it's so funny that there are many instances of these networks working. And here's another little caveat that the Wall Street Journal just ran within a few months ago. I don't know if I shared the article with you. The trucking industry has also been taken over by Patels. Like not taken over, but like started to be penetrated, and they have their own parallel like Punjabi network with like random Indian restaurants in like the middle of the Arizona deserts and all these places. It's so funny. So they went. Go ahead.
I've stayed at one of those motels in Tennessee actually because I had to go to a like window and door manufacturing plant in like bumfuck nowhere, Tennessee, Ripley, Tennessee. And I remember walking in and it was like this Indian couple who like lived on the premises. And my initial like jarring thought was like, what the hell are you doing here? It's like a town of like typical
Random
Midwestern
town. Yeah.
bloated, fat white people, town of 7,000. And it's just these this Indian couple with their kids, just like the woman doing all the cleaning of the rooms every morning, and the dude sitting there watching Bollywood films behind the desk all day.
Yeah. Yeah. Why you don't think he bought like a high quality wife back in India? I'm just kidding. What's so funny about that is like that's like the Apu story that the woke Simpsons got rid of,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is
yeah.
like that is not an inaccurate or a negative thing at all. That's like living the dream of like immigrant family, tight knit. They come and they work their ass off, and guess what? Their kids score 1700s or whatever the score is now on the SATs, and then are discriminated against from going to Harvard because of their Indian last names, and so have
I
to like
hated that.
default go to
Yeah,
UT Arlington.
that whole Simpsons thing drove me nuts because it was like Apu is a caricature of Indians, and the Indian story has evolved from that time. And it's like, one, yes, it's a caricature. The entire series is a fucking caricature of everything. Like the whole point of The Simpsons is to
Is
caricature
to caricature
literally.
satire society, and your idea of solving racism is to remove the diversity of it. We want an all-white cast in The Simpsons. It's like,
No,
what is your problem?
they wanted a more complex and nuanced Indian character that evolved with the Indian experience in the United States, which like, okay, whatever, but
Yes, that
like
is still the Indian experience. The only difference is now Apu is a mega millionaire, and all his kids went to Ivy League schools.
they're
It's like,
doctors.
yeah, every brown person in Dallas, Fort Worth, or whatever that I grew up with their parents at that time in the 80s and 90s was um, their parents were either owning Quickie Mart type shops, or they were
Hmm.
doctors and engineers. And
Hmm.
when we grew up, the doctors and engineers made high salaries and were like basically immediately rich, and the Quickie Mart workers and owners, they had like shittier
Very
houses, which was
middle class.
they only had 3-bedroom suburban houses instead of like a hut in like rain drenched India or wherever they came from. It's still like a huge level up, right? And then within 10-15 years they're like mega millionaires, because
Yeah,
guess
now
what?
the richest are the
You
people who went the commercial
Yeah, here's the ABCs of
mercantile route.
life. When you own a business and then you own another one and you reinvest the profits, you can start earning money while you sleep. Whereas if you're
Yeah.
a surgeon, you only get paid for, removing people's pancreases that don't need to be removed. Isn't that what they did to you?
That's right.
Was it a brown doctor who stole your pancreas, or was it a white doctor?
It was a brown doctor, actually. Yeah.
Okay, so you
But
can tell him,
he
like,
was he was he was he was he was the child of an immigrant. He was not an immigrant himself.
so he's assimilated perfectly into our system.
Yes.
So he would
Yes, he
follow the
is.
rules.
Yes,
Instead of
he
giving you
he followed
antibiotics for
yes.
$5, he removed your pancreas and billed your insurance for
$50,000.
$50,000.
For $12,000. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So enough ranting. Let's continue next time we talk, because I think it's probably like what, midnight where you are.
11. Yeah.
Okay, let's continue next time and actually talk about. I want to talk about the real estate industry in Austin. I want to talk about glass in and like what's going on in that city, and like how Tesla and those companies that are all like clustered around that city, how it's going to change. Because I think basically, if the 2010s was the decade of Silicon Valley, and the late 90s and early 2000s is the decade of like New York City, I feel like this next decade seems to be overly dominated by Austin, and Austin's like the zeitgeist city for the country, especially because of your uncle Joe Rogan. So
our
to be
Oprah.
continued. Yeah, yeah. The Oprah of Gen X and millennials, and I don't know if he translates to zillennials yet. He seems to have enough Gen Z guys. Well, has Gen Z, like, are they adults yet?
I don't know. Did you see that thing that I sent you? I don't think I sent you.
Hey, first of all, do we both agree that if you're so dumb to take your advice from a LSD acid dropping comedian on your health advice instead of doctors, that you deserve to die of COVID? Is that what you and I agreed on? Or you deserve to be permanently impaired with long COVID?
You know what the irony of that is that most of his listeners are like health nuts. So for all of their deficiencies in like intellectual thinking, from probably lack of training. Well, I'm being unfair, but there is a high amount of listeners to that show who are just dudes who probably have not gone to college or have gone to college but aren't like probably college in the American sense, like the non-intellectual university training that you would have gotten in college 80 years ago, but went to college more for the cultural aspect of it. A lot of the guys who listen to that show are like predisposed to being like athletic and healthy and just kind of living like an average lifestyle, but not being like a fat piece of shit, which probably means that they're going to fare better than most of the science loving larded community who gets vaccinated anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, it's so funny how
which by the way is Rogan's primary argument is if you strip away all of his insanely stupid ideas about vaccination, his main point is primarily correct, which is like, if you're not obese and you're not old, you're probably going to survive. Now, whether he understands anything with nuance about
also
risk
he doesn't
and
understand
severity,
anything about like long COVID and the fact that the virus is still, we don't have barely any. It's like, dude, how about just first of all, I don't think he's anti-vax, right? He wanted to take the vaccine. He just didn't take it before he got COVID at a stand-up show. Second of all, like, the data is clear. COVID, if you have had COVID, you should take the mRNA shots. And if you haven't had COVID, you should take the mRNA shots.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, man, I don't know if the internet has like melted people's brains down, but I actually think what it's done is revealed how dumb people are. And like, people are really
I think,
smart at the thing that they spend time studying. And what I've
yeah,
noticed is most people are not like people's brains are good enough. They're just so lazy and maybe overwhelmed with information, and their
I think
brains are
that,
spammed or something.
yeah, I think there's two tracks here. The first is that one, the United States is full of intellectually lazy people, and two, that really is a result of poor training in terms of critical thinking. We're a population that is broadly not trained to think critically and
But
think
if you
logically.
do you think that's the reality? Because I just saw some stat that's showing that 85% of the American population that's eligible for the vaccine has had at least one shot. So it might just be like squeaky wheel syndrome, and that this is a non-factor, and
I
that
don't.
COVID is also hyper targeting fat, unhealthy people. And the reason why we're seeing so much American specific death versus other places is that we have a lot, like it moves so fast and furiously that like, it's hard to tell. Also, I don't know if the body counts in other countries are as accurate. Like I trust the body counts in Japan and Korea and stuff. I don't trust any of the body counts that would come out of India. I saw tons of dead bodies when I was in India, in the middle of the richest cities in India, and I was like, I couldn't. That was the first time I'd ever. Like, I saw dead bodies in China all the time, but like, people would at least put like a cone or something around it while they waited for their. Remember, like, were you with me when I saw like, people get like car accidents and stuff, and like, you'd see a lot of like chaos and stuff over in China too. So I don't know.
It is one of
It's
the, I will say this about America, that is one of the nice things about living here is a lot of that stuff gets veiled from your eyes. The state generally does a decent job of like not letting dead things rot and
I
garbage
remember
pile up.
New York
Now I'm
City
not
had to
talking,
like
I'm
lease out
obviously not
ice cream
talking,
trucks for all the dead bodies because it was like it got hit by the first wave, and they had like mass graves in New York City in 2020
I don't think ice
because
cream trucks is correct, but it's
like
refrigerated 18
refrigerated.
wheeler trailers. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. They had to like lease out like new, and they were like, that was one of the first videos I saw about New York City.
I showed that to my boss and he was like, it's not real. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
It was Italy not real? Like I don't
He
understand.
said
Like
it's not
this is
real. He thinks it's
yeah,
like
it's
fake news.
yeah, and he's like doubled down on this
Didn't
recently, like a
someone in your
weekend.
office die of COVID?
I don't know what happened to her. She was in Houston and she like got COVID and no, they didn't tell anybody about it. And then like before Christmas in 2020, we got this like big group text message that was from one of the employees, not from anyone in management, but from one of the employees who knew her pretty well, whose like husband had like asked us to say like a prayer. And it was like this big long paragraph of like what is that strain of Christianity that like is all about like possession and speaking in tongues,
One where you
Pentecostal.
dance with snakes?
Yeah, 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 the Pentecostal one. They were part of like this Pentecostal church, and it was like this like Pentecostal prayer that was like, it was so fucking bizarre, the prayer itself, because it was like interweaving. I guess the thing about this strain of Christianity is it like interweaves like all these kind of like like native Latin American kind of like ideas and narratives and iconography of like
So what happened?
just like spirits.
She just
I don't know.
disappeared.
She went on like she got intubated and apparently she's alive, but she like never came back to work.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
okay.
another huge thing in the labor force. Like everybody's freaking out about labor force participation rates are super low, and I think people overread into like federal. I don't have any problem with the federal government airdropping FedCoin into everybody's accounts during the pandemic. Like that's great. It prevented like whatever. It prevented like mass starvation and like urban warfare. We already have like the highest murder rates in the world. We have massive like social unrests. We
They're up
had
by like, which is
whatever.
up by like 80% this year,
Yeah,
violent
we have
crime
like
and murder.
a million and a half extra deaths in the last 18 months, like from COVID. Like there's a lot of like, but also like, that all in pod where they're talking about all this like crazy shit the government's doing. It's like, yeah, the Fed messed up, maybe printing a ton of cash and whatever, but that's not explaining the low labor force participation rate. How about the global pandemic that killed 1.5 million people? The fact that baby boomers were on the edge of mass retirement anyways, and the fact that they
Yeah.
just saw like a third of their friends like almost die, and the fact that like COVID, if you didn't have the vaccine, like destroyed your lungs and made you super lethargic and like low energy after that. And people would rather just live and have less physical stuff if you're then go work for you or whatever. So
Yeah.
my mom is in that category. I don't know if she counts as an employed person, even though she's a physician, and the admin at her hospital in the middle of a pandemic decided to fire her rather than take into account that she's the highest likelihood of dying if she was exposed to COVID. And the fact that they were seeing they were telling patients to come in because the admin wanted to justify the fact that they were unnecessary. So like they were the fact that healthcare system is not being run in healthcare facilities, and they were like the admin in the healthcare industry would rather like kill people en masse than lose their jobs. Like that's crazy.